Good afternoon, grade 12s, and welcome to today's English home language lesson. My name is Bosh Suchit, and this lesson is proudly brought to you by the Gauteng Department of Education in collaboration with Cyborno Discovery Center. Now, grade 12s, we've been doing a lot of work in terms of preparation for your examinations prior to this, as well as now your prelim exams. We've covered paper 1 so far, and today we're going to start off with the paper 3 revision. So please take the time. Remember, this is the paper that costs the highest amount of marks. It's the highest weighting as well. So you need to be very careful in how you're going to approach paper 3. If you're doing very well in this paper, you're going to have a nice springboard to ensure that you can then pass the English home language exam with some really good marks. All right. So we're looking at paper 3 in terms of the essays and how to deal with, for example, a visual stimuli and a quote that would be given to you, as well as the topics that would be given normally to you in the paper. All right. So paper 3, as I've mentioned to you, is the 100-mark paper. Remember, please, we will always see two sections or two questions on this paper, and basically we're going to have section A dealing with the essays of 50 mark for one of the essay topics that you choose, and then we've got transactional 1 and 2 in section B, and that would then be 25 marks each. So in other words, you are making sure that you're going to complete 3 pieces of work for this paper. All right, all of them totaling to 100 marks. And remember, please, grade 12s, we are working on trying to ensure that you don't just get that 40% and be comfortable with it. You've got to ensure that you get 60, 70, 80, if not 90% in home language and above that, okay? So please, there are obviously minimum marks that will ensure that you are achieving between that 50 at that 50% average. There's marks that you would need to obviously be on that 60% and then that 80% category. So we're saying if you're looking at ensuring that you want to sit between that 50 and 60% in paper 3, we're saying please target between 25 to 30 marks on your essay alone. All right. And then on the 2 transactionals, target at least 13 marks out of the 2 topics. Okay. 13 to 15 maximum there would give us in that 60% range. And then if you're that candidate who wants to ensure that you get that good springboard of 80% and above, then you would target obviously 40 marks for your essay and 20 each for the transactional marks. Okay, so that would then give you a good footing for the entire exam session. Right. So in terms of paper 3, we deal with your weightings and more importantly deal with the rubric. Remember, you would have that marking guideline that ma'am also uses to ensure that they mark the paper correctly. Okay, now in paper 3 we use the rubrics that we've always been using since you started writing the essays in grade 10, and obviously the transactionals. So this is what we will be looking at in the essay when we're marking according to the rubric. The first criteria that you will see is basically your content and planning criteria, which is an average of 60% there, okay? That's 30 marks that is allocated to C. Can you ensure that the content is matching the topic you have chosen? And more importantly, have you gone through a process of planning to ensure that when you read through what sentences you have used or what ideas you have used in the essay, that they make sense and they actually are saying what you want to say? All right, so that whole planning and content is very important for the essay, and that is allocated 30 marks, which is then broken down to a 60% out of the 100% for the essay. All right, then you've got the next criteria, which is the language, style, and editing. Now, you will remember when you are writing your language paper, you learn, for example, a lot of concepts in terms of the nouns, the pronouns, the proper nouns, how to use, avoid using redundancy, tautology errors, all those things that you're picking up when you're writing, okay? Maybe when you make those mistakes. You're also very much checking that your punctuation is correctly used, the marks of punctuation are correctly used, and that you know that when I want to put a semicolon here, I put it for this reason. And I want to pause here, I use the comma, for example. All those things, you need to obviously ensure that that language mark is well taken care of. And that is done in that section that we're looking at as well when assessing you. Then your style and your editing. Remember that your style can vary. That's not a problem. Your editing, more importantly, must please be 100% done correctly. So you need to ensure that all of the language errors that you have made have then been rectified during your planning session, all right, or planning part of the paper. And thereafter, you get to then read through that final piece of work before you submit it to make sure all the I's are dotted, for example, and all the T's are crossed. In other words, there's no errors on that particular piece of work. All right. And then remember, please, to always use the formal way of writing. This is a formal examination paper, and we're avoiding the use of colloquialism and slang as far as possible with this paper. All right. So that's your 30 and 15 marks allocation there. And then we've got the section which deals with the structure. Now that is allocated 5 marks, and it then has a weighting of 10%. So if you add up 60, 30, and 10, it gives us 100% for the essay. All right. So now when we're looking at the structure, remember, you have to have paragraphs. There must be a clear introduction. There must be a clear conclusion. And then we're using obviously interlinking words or throughout that particular paragraph, 2, 3, 4, and 5, to ensure that there's a fully fledged, nice flowing essay that the reader can read through and get an idea of what you're saying. All right. And that then gives us a total of 50 marks there for your essay. So please remember also to go back and look at that physical rubric that you have been given in school when ma'am was allocating marks to you on your task 2, she marked it according to the essay rubric and she gave you marks over there. So please go and check where you probably went wrong with your piece of work. Right. So when we're looking at any piece of writing or even reading for that instance, okay, there's a process we follow. So when dealing with paper 3 and writing, we have the following process to be followed. And I'm sure you are very familiar with this already because you've done essays since grade 10, for example, on the FET level, but you've done it throughout your schooling career. Right. So the first step of the process is the planning one. All right, there you're going to make sure everything is done according to how you want it to be done in the planning session. So you're brainstorming your ideas, you are plotting down what possible ideas you want to include in this particular piece of work, and then you chop and change whatever you want to do. Okay, then with the drafting, second piece here, or second step, that is where you now start to formulate your paragraphs and formulate the final essay. Okay, so you are making sure your ideas are flowing from one idea to the next. That's your drafting process. Then you have the redrafting step, which is basically then looking at the draft that you have put together and you checking that the right ideas are included, that the purpose that you had for writing that particular piece is actually achieved through the words that you've used. Okay, so you're looking at your choice of language or your choice of words you've used there. You're looking at, have you maybe used the phrases or clauses correctly or incorrectly? That's where all that comes in terms of the redrafting. And then we have the proofreading section or step. That is where you're now going to read through the final piece here that you have written down, and you're seeing, okay, while you're reading it, obviously during the exam, you'll be reading it to yourself, okay, quietly. So you'll say, okay, this line doesn't make sense, or this line needs to be changed, or this idea must be dropped out, or this must be included. All that then you can still do in your proofreading section. And then finally, once you are 100 and almost 50% sure that this is the piece you want to submit, then you're presenting it as the final piece of work. Okay, so you have your draft, your rough work, which is your planning. All right, then you got your draft, which is the piece that is there before all your editing. Then you edit the draft, and eventually you present the final. You don't present a final draft, because then it means you're still going to change that particular piece of work. So the final piece is the final one that you are going to submit. All right, and that is your process that you need to follow when you're dealing with this. All right, so I did mention to you already, planning is basically where you are understanding the instructions, you are thinking carefully about what is the purpose for me writing this piece of work, okay? Who is my target audience here? It could be a varied audience, but you need to choose a particular set of people that you're going to be addressing. And then you're looking at the format. Now, in terms of essays, you know there's certain genres that we work with. For example, the narrative, the descriptive, your reflective, your argumentative, your expository, all those types of essays, okay? So you know there are certain things that must be included in that type of writing piece, okay? So you need to look at that when you are working with the format. Also remember the paragraphs and how they form from one idea to the next idea. Where's the topic sentence located in your first or second or third or fourth paragraph? Because each of those paragraphs would have a topic sentence, okay? So that's the planning area. Then you've got the brainstorming of the topic. Here we're looking at your use of keywords. You quickly write down maybe as many ideas as possible that you can think of on that particular topic, and then from there you start to organize those ideas on a mind map. Now, a mind map can look like this, for example. All right, maybe you decided I'm going to target this idea, use this idea to target this sense, for example, or this particular idea to target this sense of smell, or maybe the sense of touch, or maybe the sense of sound. So you can choose maybe the 4 ideas that would plot into that category, for example, or just your 4 or 5 ideas that are going to be dealt with in each of your paragraphs. So from this particular spider diagram that you're going to draw up, you are then going to obviously choose the 5 or 6 best ideas from what you have listed to then arrange them in your paragraphs. Okay, so when we're looking at a topic given to you, right, you need to obviously make sure that you answer the topic, okay, and more importantly, that you have kept the attention of your reader throughout that piece. Because if I'm, for example, marking examination number 145, and then I have 146 coming up, 145 must actually maintain my attention throughout. I mustn't then say, oh, this is so boring, and put it away and want to mark 146, for example, okay? So you need to make sure that when I have your piece of work in front of me, I do not put it down until I have marked it completely. It must be that engaging with me, all right? So the first thing you need to ensure is that you have got a hook in that particular essay. So your first paragraph, your introduction, is most likely going to be the hook paragraph, okay? It's going to create, or you're going to create a situation in that introduction that's going to stir my interest to read your piece further, okay? Then got the exposition, for example, that is where you are writing your narrative essay, okay? Where you're going to introduce us to the storyline, maybe include an idea of the primary characters that you're going to be talking about here, or even some information on the background. Okay, and then you're going to obviously then look at the next part, which is a conflict situation that might have happened in the storyline, okay, where something didn't go the way it's supposed to go, and therefore you did not, or that person in that particular piece did not achieve success. All right, so that's quite important aspects to be looking at. Then we have also the other three important parts, which is the rising action. So while you're building from paragraph 1 all the way to maybe paragraph 3 and 4, maybe 4 will include that rising action. So the conflict has happened, and it's now brought us to a point where there's so much of tension that is where we can now have that rising action being explored. Okay, so events that led us to that suspense point. Okay, then while we're at that point of where there's a suspense that's there, you now want to maybe divert my attention. And at that point, we're then looking at the flashback technique. And that's where you will include a part that is reflective, in the sense that you take me back to maybe a previous incident that happened that has probably influenced your path up until where you are now. All right, and then finally, while you are in the same dealing with the same aspects, you will then have gotten to the point of the climax, and the climax is obviously that most exciting point of the storyline that is now there, and it's going to signal a turning point either towards success or defeat in the terms of the conflict that the characters have gone through. So the falling action is now when you are bringing us to that point of releasing the tension. All right, now here you are almost taking us towards a conclusion that's possibly going to occur in terms of how these characters have interacted. And then once we are at that point, you are then going to offer us the resolution, which is the final outcome of what happened in that story. All right, so that's a process in terms of the ways in which to write your particular essays. So you can look at that and apply it to any topic you are using. All right, and at this point, grade 12s, please do not fall into the trap of going into an exam prep or your final exams where you're just going to by heart an essay that you have done really well in previously and try and slot those ideas into the topics given to you. It's not going to do you any justice. You need to ensure that you put in your fresh ideas in relation to the topic that is given to you. All right, so don't by heart certain things. Good. Then while we are looking at this, I did take you through the drafting and the redrafting positions section, sorry. So if you're looking at how you would practically do it when you're writing your essay, the first part is the drafting. So here you are following the plan and you're just writing until your draft is finished. So you're taking your mind map where you've got your 5 or 6 ideas and you now formulate a piece of work that has all the 5 ideas explored in its entirety. Now here there will be mistakes, yes. There will be things you need to drop out of the essay, include in the essay. You can always come back after and fix it. All right? When we're looking at the redrafting section, now here, you're going to ask yourself leading questions while you are reading your draft. You're going to ask, for example, is my opening strong enough? In other words, has my introduction captured the attention of the reader? Did I make a bold statement where I just almost emphasized what my belief is on this particular topic? Then you're going to ask yourself, for example, did I make use of a simple sentence versus a complex and a compound sentence? Have I maybe used an idiom that was not maybe justifiable in how I used it? those are the things that you will be looking at in terms of your structures of your sentences, or even you're going to be looking at maybe you've used statements that you have made in the about a particular topic, and you can look at the range of how many statements you've made, or how many long questions you have done, or how many sentences you have included. All right. Then, while you are doing all of this, you will be looking at the choice of words you have used. So you would now try and make sure that you move from the very simplistic words to an advanced level of using words. Okay, so you would then maybe incorporate antonyms, synonyms, homonyms, homophones, for example. All right, you'd use also maybe uh, a hyperbole where you exaggerate certain things in a particular piece. So you would use that kind of structures of your in your essay, but your vocabulary needs to match what you want to do. So if you want to ensure that you capture our attention and maintain it, use the vocabulary that you're comfortable with. All right. But if you're that learner who's had a huge run in terms of, a range of reading has that you've grown up doing, and you've got a nice vocabulary that you have accumulated over the years, you can now make use of those words when you're putting your ideas across. All right. And if you don't, or you're unable to do that, grade 12, it's also fine. You can have a very simplistic essay that's written very well, making use of the normal way that we communicate, the words that we normally use, but written very professionally for us to mark. All right. So that's important to look at the vocab you are using. Use the word appropriately. Then, if it's a non-fiction text, you can ask yourself, are my facts, for example, correct? Because there's no fun in having a particular fact and it cannot be verified by stats that we need to maybe look at. So you need to include the evidence if you've made a particular statement about something. All right, so be aware of that. Then you're also checking, for example, are my ideas flowing from one idea to the next, and did I ensure that I had a strong, coherent piece of work done, and particularly in my conclusion, did I conclude it effectively? All right. Then, while we're still working through this entire redrafting process, we're looking at my spelling, for example. Common mistakes that can be made, you look at the use of the words there and there. Although they sound the same, the spelling is different, okay? Then you're checking, is my subject in agreement with my verb? All right? That's where we're getting those errors coming through, your Concord errors. Your tenses. You are allowed to vary the tense, yes, but ensure that it's done correctly, okay? So you can move between present and past, it's fine, but make sure that it's done correctly. My punctuation marks I mentioned to you before, please make sure that that particular punctuation mark supports the actual meaning of what you want to say. All right, so let's break it down in terms of planning, all right? So with regards to planning, it's your brainstorming. You're writing down your words, your phrases, the ideas that come to your mind in terms of the particular topic. Now, at that point, remember, everything might sound okay and some things might sound stupid. It is fine. Just put it down because it's still your planning section. Now, once you've done that, you've written things that you might find are necessary or unnecessary. Once you're done with that, grade 12s, read through your notes that you've made and then pull out at least 3 to 5 main ideas that you could be speaking about, because those will then dictate the paragraphs you are going to be using or writing. Each of the idea will be one paragraph, as I mentioned to you, and then you'd have other ideas surrounding or minor ideas surrounding the main idea in each paragraph, right? And then by this time, you would have established what type of essay you are going to write. Now you're ready to write your introduction, and then from there we move to the next part, which is the body. So if you imagine the introduction, it would be the face, okay? This. You want to ensure that it hooks the attention of the reader. So you want to describe every unique, beautiful feature that it has that would engage the audience. All right. From there, you move to the body, and now we're going to put some meat onto the bones of the body. So here we expand on each of the idea that I have selected. So in paragraph 2, I've got an idea. I expand on that idea in paragraph 2. Same thing in paragraph 3, paragraph 4, paragraph 5. Okay, so expand on them. Now, once you've got that, you have developed a nice, fully fledged paragraph. Choosing the words here is very important, as I mentioned to you, because this is where you're going to paint my interest. Okay, if you're using words that are used incorrectly or inappropriately used, you have lost the reader altogether. All right, again, please, your sentences, I did say to you, vary the range of sentences. The worst thing you can do is start from line 1 and put the first word and write all the way through without using punctuation marks, and think it's all right to use one long sentence for 450 words. I can tell you the reader will be baffled, and more importantly, we would not know where exactly one idea is ending and the next one is starting. So keep the sentence length in mind. All right. Again, punctuation marks, use them very effectively, and also remember to check for repetition. There can be an idea that can be important, yes, but don't make it be repeated throughout the essay. All right? Good. And then you come to the conclusion, and at that point, your essay now comes to full circle, and you are ready to stamp your authority in terms of your approval that this is what I wanted to say. And now you do your final paragraph, which binds the entire essay together. All right, into a unit. So here you must be careful that you do not introduce a new idea, that you don't give us this long-winded moral lesson on why your topic was so important to be written about. And then please, leave us to think a bit further. Don't just, end off and force us to believe in a particular idea. Okay, so here is now a synopsis of the structure of the essay. Now, grade 12. If you have never understood how to write an essay, I'm sure at some point your teacher would have taken you by the hand and said, listen, let's look at how we can formulate a piece of writing in terms of breaking it down into paragraphs. Now, if you've mastered the skill on how to write one paragraph really well, then you can apply the same technique to the next paragraph and the next paragraph, okay? But essentially, when I talked about that rubric which we use to mark the essay, we are saying, in terms of the structure of the essay, does the candidate have the following things that are important? For example, does he or she have the introduction that is going to capture my attention immediately? Okay, there might have been a funny point that could have been mentioned to hook my attention. All right, so it's short and it's catchy, to the point. Keep it short and simple. All right, then we've got your next part, which is the body, as I've mentioned to you, where we're putting on some meat on the skeleton here. And there's basically about 3 to 4 paragraphs, I would say, okay? That should take you to your word count of 450 words. So you're looking at each paragraph there, having the topic sentence, as I mentioned to you, which is your main idea for each paragraph. And then you're building around that main idea other you're building in terms of putting more information of what that particular idea is all about. So there must be a logic sequence from the one paragraph to the next to the next. Okay. So we use words, interlinking words such as further or furthermore or however, for example. Again, remember where the punctuation mark comes in terms of the comma after which interlinking word. All right. Then finally, I did mention to you the summing up is all about the conclusion. And here we're not including a new idea altogether, but we're linking the introduction and the various ideas in the essay right up to the conclusion. So you tying it all together. So if you had to look at your tie that you use for school, for example, all right, that the main one that shows at the front, the long part that's wider than the back part, okay, that is your conclusion. We see a nice fully fledged tie knot being completed and the thick part coming down, and at the back was your introduction that captured the attention and obviously all tied together in terms of the knots at the top, and then finally with the conclusion. All right, so that's maybe a way to look at how we work with the essay. Right, so now we've come to the next part, which is very important, the genres. You would have gone through these genres before and hopefully you have mastered them. The first one, which is the easiest one to work with grade 12s, is the narrative genre, because there you get to entertain me as a reader. You can write a story which can be written in the past tense, for example, and it can be very convincing. So you can create a whole different scenario that no one's ever thought about. And as long as you can convince me that it is actually possible or it makes sense, you're well on your way to achieve the marks. All right. Then we've got the descriptive genre, and that is where we are describing something in a very vivid manner. Okay. So you're making use of a lot of strong adjectives and then obviously verbs and things there as well. So a strong adjectives must come through. Then we've got the third genre, which is the reflective one. And this is quite a nice one to also work with, where we take our reader on a sort of an emotional journey with us. So we look at the reactions that you as a person have to a particular subject matter or a personal idea about a topic, or even where you're dealing with your feelings of sincerity here. So you take us through that journey while we are reading the particular reflective piece. All right. Then we've got the next one, which is the argumentative one. And this is the one that we thought would be the easiest because all of you love to argue your point and tell us how good you are at something. So here you are arguing a case, but you're arguing the case only for one side of the argument. So you either for or against the statement that has been mentioned. Okay. And therefore, grade 12s, you are going to make sure that you convince the reader, in this case, the marker, of your opinion and make her or him believe that what you're saying is the gospel truth, and therefore they need to give you the good marks for that. All right. So this is usually written in the present tense, and that is important. Okay, because it's taking us through that one-sided argument. And then we have the next one, where we've got both the ideas, the pros and the cons, or your for and your against argument being included in the piece of work. All right. So you're presenting basically opposing views in that essay. Right? And then the expository essay, which is a bit challenging to write, but if you are very sure that you know how to write it and you've been able to achieve the marks with that kind of genre so far, go ahead and do it. All right? So this is very much a factual essay, and your information is then presented in a very systematic way and a logical way. So you're tackling a concept in one paragraph with evidence that is backing it up, and you're going on and on and on in your next 2 or 3 paragraphs. Okay. So those are the types of essays that you can work with. Okay. Now that you have gone through the structures, the format, the process of how to write, let's look at possibly a quick strategy that you can employ when you are doing your essay. It's basically the 5 W's and the H. It's the same thing that you would be using in a literature paper, for example, when you are reporting on what is happening in terms of the question asked of you there, okay? So here you are going to say, for example, ask yourself, who is the narrator in my narrative piece, or who is narrating a story, a descriptive story that is the second genre, okay? What am I writing about? Is important. Is my content relevant? That's a key question to ask, okay? Where is my story or my event taking place? Because that background information and that setting must be created initially in the first and second paragraph, okay? And then you would ask yourself, but then why did I choose this particular topic? Obviously, because you know a lot more about that topic than the next topic, but it's also because you have a lot of more information and you're more passionate about that concept that is being spoken about. And then when is the story taking place? Very important, okay, in terms of the making sure your tenses are in agreement. And then how will what I have written now, how will that affect my reader's point of view? Okay, so you would essentially want to convince the reader that this is your viewpoint and this is why it is correct. And we should then believe in what you are saying. All right. So always think about ideas that are unique to you, because it might be the case that what you think about is not what the next person is thinking about. So be original and different in terms of how you present your final piece. Right? Then, in terms of the narrative essay, I did mention written in the past tense. Okay? So here it is basically recreating an experience that you've gone through, for example, over time, or a person has gone through maybe a harsh reality that they faced. All of those things take us through that journey of time. There, it is very important for you to note that it doesn't need to be a true story. It can be based on any experience that has happened. And it must be convincing, as I mentioned to you, and then obviously explore the idea or the lesson behind it. Okay. Then introduction very much must be captivating. It should then be, the ending must also be either satisfying, maybe can confuse the reader, for example, but it must never be a thing like, oh, okay, I thought as much he or she was going to say this at the end. Don't be predictable. Right. Then a strong description element must come through in the narrative essay, even though it is a narrative essay. All right. And then basically that is your checklist there to say, did I write in the past tense? Did I have an introduction that included the setting in terms of the scene? Have I looked at a conflict that happened and how it must resolve? And then basically, have I then included a conclusion that would resolve my conflict? All right. Then we go on to the descriptive essay. And I'm going to take a break for a minute and I'm going to be back with you shortly. Oh, welcome back, grade 12s. Just a minute or so away from you, and we're tackling the paper 3, the essays, and I am now busy on the topic of the descriptive essay. All right. Remember that one's where we're going to vividly describe maybe a person or a memory or an event that took place, or even a situation in life that has occurred. It can even be about an object that you want to describe. So there'll be a very strong descriptive element coming through where you're going to be making use of the adjectives. All right. This is often then done where we're creating a certain atmosphere or a mood in that particular room when the piece is being read, okay, or by that person. So here, grade 12s, please make use of your figures of speech, okay, but don't overuse them. Make use of your adjectives and your adverbs in moderation as well, because you want to definitely create a powerful image or a powerful idea in the particular reader's mindset. So please be aware of that. Okay. Then further on to that, create pictures in the mind of the reader. I did mention to you, please ensure that you also engage with the 5 senses that we have. So you would make sure that you have dealt with one idea that talks to maybe the sense of touch that a person can imagine. Then you can maybe include one about the taste that possibly would be linked to the topic you are talking about. All right. But if it doesn't fit your topic, don't try and put all 5 senses in there. It's fine as long as you can make sure you've included at least about 2 possibilities for us there. That's important. Okay. So remember that you want to appeal to the senses of the reader. Thereafter, look at an example here. We've got the sky is a bright shade of blue and white clouds seem to float in it. I mean, that's basically, quite a simple description. But if you talked about something like puffy white clouds float across the cobalt blue sky. Now the reader is thinking, oh wow, that's a very beautiful image, because these puffy clouds means that they you can almost like imagine bouncing off them all the time from one to the next, and you in this cobalt blue sky, it's not a too dark, not too light, it's just the right deep kind of blue that we want to talk about. All right, so that is the one that will immediately get the reader to imagine certain things. Now, if you had to think about maybe when you had gone on a plane ride, or you maybe took a long distance trip, you would have seen certain images that you had come across. Now try and tell the reader about those experiences using descriptive words. Take him from the ordinary to the extraordinary level of understanding. All right, so your figures of speech that I said you can be using here, please make sure they are done in terms of original ways. So there's some examples there for you there. You want to also make sure that you have some sort of experience of the topic, because it's very difficult for you to describe something if you've never ever had an experience with it. Okay, so first-hand knowledge is what you should be working with when you even selecting your topics. Right, the descriptive essay continues here for us in terms of saying, please look at your figurative language being used, your emotive language being used, and then look at the fact that you've written in the present tense and you've got this nice journey with the reader being showcased. You have included maybe a reference to at least 2 or 3 of your senses there, the imagery of your sense that they can attach to our senses, and then you've used descriptive words. And please always try and include a setting if you can there, and then maybe have a theme that is usually to do with someone's feelings or emotions about the particular object or incident. Right. So we go to the next genre, which is the reflective essay. And this is quite a nice one because we get to use the flashback technique here as well. All right. So we're giving very much an emotional reaction to a particular topic that we are reading about. So, or we have come across here. So we want to express our feelings of sincerity. Please, grade 12s, at this point, remember to be subjective. Okay, original in terms of what you think about the topic. Include your personal feelings, your personal opinions about the particular topic. Okay, draw on your personal experience because that will show us a sense of you understanding where you fit in terms of the topic. Please don't try and convince us of what you are experiencing as the most, best experience ever that you've had. We can figure that out by ourselves. All right. Include a strong conclusion, as I always mentioned with the essays, and make sure it sums up the introduction. All right. So when we're talking about the word reflective, it comes from the root word reflect, which means to think deeply about something. All right. Considering something, that's your synonym, for example. Studying something deeply, contemplating about a particular issue, dwelling on an issue. That's going very much from a sort of a surface level to an in-depth level of understanding. So it's not a hurried consideration. It's very much a slow moving, almost, indefinite, if I can say it. It's like it has to be the kind of experience, right? So that's the reflective essay, and you need to ensure that you are always focusing on a clearly defined incident that you want to speak about. So it can include a series of other events that are related to that particular incident, but there must be that focal incident. You have included background information, very important. You have included elements of a narrative essay, for example, where you've got an idea of a plot coming through, characters being involved in the setup, their setting in terms of where this incident took place, and possibly maybe a conflict situation that has occurred for them to now reflect on the pros and the cons. So you're very much going to ensure that you've organized your ideas clearly and there's a logical, chronological flow as well. Please remember your word choice is very important, and that you have also, led us into the idea of why this particular event or incident was important to talk about. Right. For more importantly, you'll go through your checklist as well when you are preparing to make sure that you have looked at what the reflective essay is all about, and you've included the main ideas there as well. That makes it a reflective essay. Right. Therefore, grade 12s, when you're using the reflective essay genre, please jot down your response in terms of your experiences, your opinions, or any information you think relevant. Discuss your response to the thoughts and feelings. Explore the learning that you have achieved while the process has been unfolding, and then obviously include maybe an opportunity that has come across come about while you have been reflecting about a particular incident or person. All right. So very much a pensive piece of work. Right, then I mentioned the other genre to you previously, which was the argumentative one, where we are convincing the reader of our particular viewpoint. It's written in the present tense, right? Please be clear, forceful, and use your formal language. Remember, there must be an introduction, and that will clearly state your position on the particular topic, right? Then each paragraph from there onwards would be in relation to the statement you have made or the standpoint you have taken. And then the final one, which is the conclusion, will then sum up the position that you have taken. Right. So please, there's a specific opinion you're talking about, and you're going to argue for or against that particular idea. Please also remember it's very much subjective, and you're going to persuade the reader to believe in your viewpoint. So you will use, in this instance, the peel system, where you make sure that each of your paragraph has your main point. You're going to have the evidence to back up that main point, and you're going to explain that evidence in relation to the main point, and you're going to link that point from there to the next paragraph, and you're going to follow the same idea in paragraph 3, 4, and 5. So make use of the peel structure, right? So it's a clearly thought out piece of work, and you have a reason for writing it, which is to make the audience believe in what you are saying. Right, use the present tense, the introduction there, very much important, as I mentioned to you. And then please support your ideas by giving reasons and evidence for why you believe that that is important. And then you'd say, for example, use words like because, this shows, however, and therefore, this is why the viewpoint is held about this particular point. Right? Did I just have a gremlin visit me there? Yes, I did. Okay, so the next one is discursive essay, which is now where we're including both points of view. Again, it's similar to the argumentative, now that you have included the second part, which is either the against part or the for part, which you might have chosen not to in the first part. All right, so your introduction, you state what the issue is and how you will consider it from different points of view. Then you have maybe two paragraphs in that are elaborating on the favorable incidents or favorable evidence that you have included, and then the next two would be the arguments against that particular information and provide the evidence for that. And then finally, the conclusion will summarize the main points, and you would then give us a recommendation for why this particular idea is important to take note of or not. Right, then the argumentative essay is here, it is mentioned for you, where you're going to argue for or against. You're looking at rhetorical devices being used and very much persuasive techniques. The conclusion is strong, it's clear, it's straightforward, it's convincing about what you want to say. The discursive essay, here we are able to reflect on both sides of the argument, and we are remaining impartial. When we're doing that, we are also making sure that there's a very rational flow of ideas, there's an objective point of view here, and that we have supported what we've said with evidence also, either for or against. Okay, and then basically at the end of the essay, you would then be able to include your opinion. But this should only be done in the conclusion. So you could give very much a mixed idea here of saying to us that this is why you either decide to sit on the bench because you could not find a way to either agree to the for or the against argument, for example. All right, so your hints in terms of choosing your creative writing essay topic. Please, firstly, read all the topics. Write down a few ideas on each of the topic. Eliminate the topics that you do not understand or you know very little about, because that's not what you're going to target. You're going to underline all the keywords in the chosen topic so that you ensure that you tackle each of those important points in your paragraphs. Then you're going to choose the topic that you fully understand. If you're uncertain about any part of the essay topic, do not attempt that particular topic. Right. So what makes a good read for us is that you have selected a topic which is right for you. You have used your prior knowledge and vocabulary to give us a fully fledged piece. You've shown evidence of proper planning. All right. You have also included a striking introduction. You've hooked the reader to believe your idea. You've included interesting content in paragraph 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then effective use of words and sentences has taken place, and eventually you had a striking conclusion. All right. Now, when looking at editing, you are rereading and correcting the piece of work. So that's important, okay? And that is how you would ensure that you have done a good essay in terms of topics given to you. All right. Then we're looking at a quote that's given. Now, please, when you read the quote, ensure that you read through it at least 3 times. At that point, you're going to dissect that particular quote. You're going to look at the words that are given there and define those keywords on your piece of paper, on your exam paper. Please, at this point, establish what the quote means. So if you don't know what the quote means, then it is important that you go for a next question, all right? Because if you don't know what the quote means, you obviously will not capture the essence of the quote, all right? So be comfortable in what you want to say here. So if you chose the quote and you have now decided it's for you, you then have to ensure that you define the topic and you get that spirit included in terms of what the quote is all about. You decide on what you want to write about, you focus on that idea and on the audience, and then you seek to impress them with your presentation. So quotes are subject to both a literal and a figurative interpretation. So you should look at what the literal meaning of the quote is, and then move it into the figurative meaning. So you want to interpret it in such a way that it would then deliver an outstanding piece of work. All right. So look at, very much moving from the simplistic way into more the connotative way. Right. So when approaching the quote, please remember the question paper will be between will give you, an option of either 2 or 3 visuals, all right? And here, the temptation, we're not talking about quote anymore, we're talking about the imagery, okay, the stimuli. Here, it will then be for you to visualize the image that is given to you, right? Now, describe the visual is usually a good idea, but this must be avoided. Instead, you must have a powerfully well-crafted essay. So you can choose a part or 2 of that particular piece of work and image, and then write about it. So it's there to evoke a reaction within yourselves. And therefore, when you've got that reaction, you'd like to share it with the reader. And therefore, you would then do that when you are drafting your piece of work. Right. So look at it meticulously, absorb all the details in the visual, and then make sure it grasps the concept of grasp the concept of what the visual is presenting. Right? Thereafter, you then look at it in terms of your ideas, tackling the imagination of the reader. All right? Set the scene, set the background of what's going on. Look at what kind of impression are you creating in the mind of the reader. All right? Then please remember to describe the visual in detail and then possibly state messages that it might embody. Please, grade 12s, there has to be a connection between what you are talking about in the essay and a part of the visual that is being linked to your content. So, the tendency is very much to take a prepared essay and shove it in there and make it link one way or the other. So be careful that you do not do that, and you then, or if you do that, you're going to find yourself failing that particular piece of work. So make sure that your argument or your storyline is very much based on what you're seeing in that particular visual at that particular point. All right. Then generate your own theme and topic as inspired by the visual, because there will not be a topic given to you. All right. And ensure that it's related to the visual. Please then, grade 12s, develop a plot, a storyline, or even a strong argument for what you want to do with this particular visual. Weave your storyline and look at the various arguments, for example, according to a theme or a topic that you have developed. Right? So there's a simple approach for you to look at when you're writing an essay. One, read the essay prompt thoroughly. So you read what the question's asking you thoroughly, dissect it. Then, from that point, choose a topic that you know about. Then you look at the outline of the essay, where you would then be doing the planning and looking at the paragraphs that you would include. Look at the structure. Do you have the introduction, the body, and the conclusion? All right. Then you go on to step 5, which is writing the essay out, the draft. Okay. At that point, it's still very much a first piece of work. It needs to be edited. Then, while you are doing that, write down your introduction separately, and then you from there move to the body with each of the ideas that you are going to showcase, and then write your conclusion, and basically at that point edit the essay and present it as a fully fledged piece. Right. Then in terms of the structure, it is almost like a very delicious sandwich that you would like to have. All right, so you'd have the introduction, that is very much the bread that covers everything. All right, and that bread can be quite a nice piece of bread. It could be maybe, bread that has seeds on it. It could be maybe garnished with something on the top. That is the kind of information you'd include with the introduction. Then from there, you'd move into your striking ideas, which could possibly be the lettuce, the tomato, the gherkins, the cheese, the actual patty, that makes the burger interesting and want the person to read. And that is where your ideas are dealt with in terms of the vocabulary that you're going to choose to use here and your sentence types, okay? And then basically from there, you're then going to ensure that after all of these things are done, you have concluded with the conclusion. So you've tied the entire essay up in the conclusion. All right, so that is where we have now come to the end of the lesson with regards to paper 3, creative writing. So please, grade 12s, go back and go through the various genres that you would be using in paper 3. Now, I did not go in terms of looking at questions from previous papers, because again, I can give you an idea that I think is relevant for a particular topic, and for you, you might see something totally different with the topic. So this is where your originality and your ideas come into play. Please make sure that you go back and look at the past 5 years in terms of paper 3 that has been written, topics. From there, try and tackle them. And more importantly, be very clued up with what's happening in the world around you, be it internationally or nationally. That is where more or less your topics would most likely come from. All right. So please, grade 12s, go back and prepare well for this. Okay. And then basically we have come to the end, and I am going to really look forward to seeing you for the next lesson, where we'll be ending off with the revision in terms of your paper 3, which will then deal with the transactional pieces. That will then take place on the 25th of August. That's next week, Monday, at the same time. And we will then tackle your final revision of paper 3. So until that time, grade 12s, please take care of yourself, take care of your family, take care of your health as well, and be happy that you are where you are and get the maximum marks possible to have a brighter future at the end of the day. Thank you for watching this lesson with us, and we look forward to seeing you again next week.